Scandinavia, a group of countries famous for their idyllic countryside, their tranquil lakes, their peaceful mountains, home of the Nobel Peace Prize, everyday IKEA. But deep beneath the bowels of Stockholm lies a much darker history. Not far from here, in the Swedish History Museum, lies a room, heavily guarded, known as the Gold Room. It's here, flanked by Viking runestones, that we can glimpse some of that darker past. On this picture stone, Odin, the Lord of the Vikings, enters Valhalla on his eight-legged steed, Sleipnir. Valhalla, the hall which Vikings who fell in battle hoped to enter. Their age was one of bloodshed, war, and gold. Of that gold, 52 kilograms can be found in this room. The gold finds have been found all over Sweden, as shown in this picture, many of them dating from the Viking Age. From about 700 AD to 1100, the Vikings traded and raided across Europe, going as far as Russia in the east and North America in the west. In a world in which the superpower of Rome had fallen, much of the Mediterranean was open for plunder and taking. Here you can see a silver hoard, which includes coins from the Islamic Caliphate in the east. The early Vikings wouldn't always use coins. They sometimes used this hack silver they'd chop a bit off to trade, and the goods they would trade would include both silks and human slaves. In 793 AD, the Vikings raided the monastery of Lindisfarne in England, lifting gold, silver, and other precious objects. This was the start of the Viking raids in England, which culminated in the invasion of the Great Theban Army in 865, which annexed vast swathes of the country. Monasteries in England, France, and Ireland were soft targets with easy treasures like these to plunder, although eventually the Vikings themselves would become Christian and make some of their own. This age, the last of the pagan age in Europe, was the most terrifying. Kings would try to buy off the Vikings with gold or other treasures to prevent any further damage to their lands and peoples. But sometimes it was no use. The Vikings would use the gold to go away and come back with even more men to take even more treasure. Viking warriors who were especially favoured by their king would be given things such as a gold arm ring or a famous cup as a mark of respect and honour. This was an age of charismatic warriors and leaders, immortalised in poetry, a largely illiterate society focused on heroes, as shown in Old English epics like Beowulf and in the Viking sagas themselves. What was the secret of the Vikings' success? How did they manage to raid across such vast territory? To answer this, I'm going to be heading to Denmark, to Roskilde. Today Roskilde is a relatively small town, just a few miles from Copenhagen, the capital of Denmark. But back in the Viking Age, it was one of the biggest cities, and towards the end of it, it was in fact the capital. I'm here to take a look at the most iconic Viking vehicle, the ship, at the Viking Ship Museum. I'm reaching the headland, looking out into the bay. I can see the sail of a Viking warship. We do not know exactly what was the cause of the Vikings' success, but some of it probably has to do with advances in shipbuilding technology, changes in the climate which allowed for more storage of cod and longer voyages, and also the collapse of the central authority of the Roman Empire to repel the invaders in Europe. Here's the first of these that I'm going to be looking at in the Viking Ship Museum. The museum itself contains the remains of 5 ships sunk previously to defend Roskilde at the end of the Viking Age. The ships consist of several trading vessels along with 2 warships. Here you can see one of the trading vessels. Although at this time in popular imagination the majority of Scandinavia would have been mead-swilling warriors, the majority of the people are in fact farmers transporting the goods to market in ships like this. But the same construction skills allow them to build warships like this 30-footer. You can still see some of the shield rail remaining here. The shallow draft enabled it to sail up rivers and to attack abbeys and monasteries inland. The ships were not mass-produced or standardized. They used relatively primitive tools for their construction, but they've been found in the modern day to still be highly effective. Here we can see the largest ship in the collection. This is a 90-foot ocean-going warship. A replica of this has been sailed all the way from Denmark to Dublin in Ireland. The timbers, in some cases 1,000 years old, have been rescued from the bottom of the harbour and preserved, although not all of them remain today. We have the Danes to thank for their excellent conservation work, and also these replicas, both on a small scale within the museum and on a larger scale in the harbour, which enable us to see how they would have looked and handled in their heyday. Imagine a scene 1,000 years ago. You're a Viking, clad in mail, in a boat like this, the sea is lapping against the sides of the ship. You have your shield on the shield rail. You're shipping out from Denmark all the way to Dublin, or possibly even further, to Iceland, the land of the sagas, or even to the very edge of the known world in North America. What will get you there is the careful shipbuilding skills, the villages, your provisions, and a will not to give up, but to seek to travel onto further horizons, no matter what. The final part of my Viking voyage takes me back to the Viking History Museum in Sweden to see some of the artifacts which were part of the Viking world. In an age where reading and writing was virtually non-existent, everyday objects such as keys took on important symbolism. These were often buried with their owners, showing ownership of, say, land or goods as a sign of status. The approach to death was not uniform across the Viking world. In some cases, individuals were buried, in others they were cremated. When they were buried, sometimes there would be elaborate grave goods. The Vikings also had extensive metalworking skills, although we don't know if this was done by the warriors themselves, or whether it was a subservient class of slave craftsmen, like in the tale of Whale and Smith. Viking warriors were so feared with swords at one point the King of France banned the export of Frankish blades. The Vikings were also weavers of stories, myths and patterns. These picture stones, although not filled with text, so not necessarily easy to understand, reflect some of that mythology. This recreation of a cloth shows some of the patterns which may have existed within the brightly coloured homes of the Viking world. As the Viking Age wore on, the Vikings became more influenced by the Christian nations to the south, although there were still traces of their old gods, like Thor and Odin, and sometimes you would find Vikings who were Christian and pagan living side by side, as these artifacts show. Some of the leaders especially wanted to hedge their bets between both the old and the new gods. So you may see Thor's hammer worn like a cross, or this spearhead, which perhaps is a relic like Longinus or Odin's Gungnir. Part of the appeal of Christianity to the Viking rulers was the ability to write and read, and therefore have control over more men and more territory. As the modern states of Denmark, Norway and Sweden began to emerge towards the end of the Viking Age as Christianized states, this marked the end of the heroic age, the Viking war bands. The end of an age of disorganized violence and blood feuds. The end of the age of raids on monasteries and the slaughtering of monks for treasure. The end of the longest voyages all the way out to North America and the far west. The wind was turning, as can be seen in this weather vane from the very end of the Viking Age. The swords of the Vikings would be laid to rest, and in their place would come a new age of kings, of churches, taking the Viking patterns and carvings and transforming them into marble for the new age.